There are many legal gun owners who are taking issue with Ottawa's proposed new gun ban legislation, which would allow municipalities to ban the handguns. There are also some local politicians who are not too happy with it, including Alberta Justice Minister Casey Madu. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, you've been following this story closely, and the main reason Minister Madu takes issue with the legislation is that it doesn't really go after the real criminals who have illegal handguns?
Yeah, he said basically that the Liberals are, I believe his words were obsessively focused on law abiding gun owners, and instead of going after the criminals who use them to commit crimes. So he said that in a statement on Tuesday night. And the other thing that you'd mentioned was this municipal handgun ban possibility. It's sort of, they've gone through the assault weapons ban, so called. There's a gun buyback coming, and the federal government has also apparently given municipalities the power to put in bylaws about transportation and things like that would essentially make it impossible to own a handgun in a city. Um, Now, the issue with this that the justice minister points out is that municipalities are the province's jurisdiction. So they're sort of saying that, well, this is our jurisdiction, not yours, so you can't do this. And that is perhaps a little bit debatable in terms of the clash between province and federal governments. But the other thing that's happened and has been going on for a while, sort of in the background here, is a private member's bill from the Brooks Medicine Hat MLA that would basically limit the power that Alberta municipalities have to even put these laws into place. And Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi was asked about it. He said, look, maybe we'll do this, maybe we won't. But the issue that he saw in it was there should sort of be one law across the entire country. So the whole thing is sort of an odd scenario. And, even people I think who are instinctually inclined to support this sort of thing are maybe scratching their heads a little bit about how it might work.
So Brooks Medicinet MLA, as you mentioned, Michaela Glasgow has introduced that bill that would limit the ability of municipalities in Alberta to restrict the activities. So, but how would that actually work, Tyler, with the proposed new federal legislation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if anyone actually really knows the answer just yet. There's been some hints that the UCP is going to expedite this private member's bill to try and get it passed into law. And then I suppose at that point, it becomes a question for the courts, most likely, if, say, Edmonton decides to put this in place and then someone challenges it. It's frankly a little bit of a mess. But of course, the other thing, because there's always so many things happening on these sort of interjurisdictional issues, is there may be a federal election coming. And this law, these new gun restrictions, might not even get passed into law before something like that happens. So at the end of the day, this could be, a bunch of noise about what amounts to being nothing.
The RCMP union has launched a campaign to save the Mounties in Alberta. Now, and as you and I have discussed before, the Kenney government says it wants to see a provincial police force similar to what they have in Ontario. Does it all come down to dollars and cents?
At the end of the day, you have to think it probably will. As it operates right now, the Mounties operating in Alberta there's a cost sharing agreement between the federal government and the provincial government to pay for policing. So the question, if Alberta was to go ahead with a provincial police force, would be how much does Alberta then just have to pay? Will there be any grant money or something like that coming from the federal government? But at the end of the day, yeah, I think it probably is going to be a matter of cost. Now, this is obviously linked in with some other issues that you and I have talked about before. This idea came up with the Fair Deal panel when it was doing its work. There have been issues with rural crime. Rural residents and those in smaller towns have been concerned about RCMP response times, things like that. The UCP has sort of argued that perhaps a local police force would be better able to address these things. So the National Police Federation, representing RCMP members, is sort of going through this campaign, pointing out the good stuff that RCMP members do in the province, and trying to make the case that this is a more efficient, more affordable way to do policing. So, also to some extent, I think, fighting for the jobs of their members.
Even though Alberta has seen variants of the COVID-19 virus, Dr. Dean Henshaw says that will not hinder the province's reopening plans. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. She's said basically that they haven't set a threshold for these cases to at what point they're going to say, whoa, 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 we need to slow down. So we have around 200, 250 perhaps now cases of the variants in the province, but they've really been only growing by about a dozen cases per day on average. So at this point, medical officials and the government, watching this very, very closely. But these are still by no means the dominant strain in Alberta. They are not spreading, wildly, or overtaking the other variant, the main variant. So she's basically saying a wait and see approach, I think would be fair to say. But certainly they haven't rushed forward on reopening things that are currently closed.
Tensions continue to rise between government health officials and various church leaders across the country. Now, here in Alberta, the pastor of Grace Life Church just outside of Edmonton continues to host Sunday services in excess of the gathering size rules of 15%. Pastor James Coates turned himself into police on Tuesday, and he's being represented by James Kitchen with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms.
Yes. So this has sort of been a little bit of an ongoing drama. And last weekend, the RCMP went to the church, and he was basically charged for violating public health orders. And he's sort of consistently maintained, his lawyers have consistently maintained that he's exercising his charter rights to freedom of religion, freedom to worship, things like that. And as it stands now, he's actually still in custody. He was sort of arrested for refusing to abide by the public health orders and ignoring a judge who had said that they ought to be enforced. And he had a bail hearing this week where he basically said that he was not going to follow the rules, and so he's held over until his next bail hearing. So he's still behind bars at this time. So yeah, there have been a few other cases of this across the country. We saw it in Montreal a little bit at the start of the pandemic. There have obviously been plenty of concerns among religious Canadians about their ability to go and worship, but this is certainly the let's say the most high stakes example, I would say, that we've seen so far, certainly in Alberta.
Yeah, also the church in Steinbach, Manitoba as well. I just never thought I'd see
Yes.
the day a pastor being arrested for preaching the word of God. Like we live in unprecedented times right now, Tyler. Now, the NDP is questioning the UCP rollout of $1,200 checks to essential workers as part of a cost-sharing program between Alberta and Ottawa. Now, Alberta's spending $118 million and the feds $347 million, and the money will be going towards different sectors, including nurses, childcare workers, but the opposition is wondering about maybe some retail workers?
Yeah, so the idea is that this is a little bit of money, a little bit of support for people who have, sort of been at the front lines of the pandemic, whether that's, someone's been working at the gas station, someone's been working in the hospital kind of thing. And the NDP has basically been concerned that the details of who this money is going to go to hasn't been clear enough. Obviously was going to go to people like nurses, but what about the people who've been working in grocery stores and things like that? So the UCP says details are coming on this, but these are significant programs that I think probably take quite a bit of work to sort out. But the NDP is raising concerns about this. And the other thing that is sort of happening in the money front is the Alberta government announced on Wednesday some new funding for small and medium-sized businesses, basically, I think up to $10,000 to sort of help them weather this next leg of the pandemic. So, we've seen lots of money coming from the feds through the CERB program and wage benefit programs and things like that. And these are, just two examples of what the Alberta government is sort of contributing to help people out who are on the front lines of the pandemic, let's say.
Tyler, a survey from student groups suggests there has been a brain drain in the province with young people not seeing many prospects for their future. Now, Tyler, some of these well-educated and talented young people are thinking of leaving for greener pastures?
Yeah, a study by the University of Calgary Student Union just sort of surveying people and saying, what are your post-graduation plans? And the people they talk to, some of them certainly, are looking at Alberta and saying, there's been a long economic recession that we're in right now that there isn't, an obvious or immediate way out of. There's budgetary issues. There's the issues of what some tax reform might look like. There's jobs issues. There's healthcare issues. They're concerned about tuition levels right now, as those seem likely to be going up. So, in conclusion, they're basically looking at the circumstances of the Alberta Advantage and saying they don't really see the advantage anymore. So perhaps they'll decamp to BC, perhaps to the United States. This isn't an obviously huge political problem at this point, but I would say that the UCP and Jason Kenney in particular have talked a lot about Alberta's benefit to business and entrepreneurs and investors because of a young, well-educated workforce. I think we might have the youngest workforce in the country. So, at some point, if this brain drain materializes, I think that does become a political issue. Um, of course, a survey is one thing. Whether or not we start seeing people leave in large droves is another. But it's just one of those, trends, I think, on sort of the sidelines here that's worth keeping an eye on.
I've spoken to some college graduates as well here in southern Alberta, graduating from university and college, and they're thinking of going to Vancouver, Toronto. Let me tell you, it's an eye-opener, especially if you want to try and save up to buy your first home. A fixer-upper for 1.6 million. Then they're like, well, maybe
Yeah,
Alberta is
exactly.
looking pretty good right about now, A
Yeah.
longer-term care association has been lobbying the province to shield it from lawsuits related to deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tyler, there appear to be a wide variety of class action lawsuits against home operators across the country.
There's been a lot of drama in long-term care homes since the start of the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. That the bulk of the tragedy has happened in long-term care homes. And as you say, class action lawsuits brought by families of people who died in these homes. So basically, what operators are saying is they sort of want to be shielded from liability. In a way that I believe other medical professionals are. They're saying that, look, if you can sue us for someone in long-term care passing away, then our business model essentially is broken. It would destroy the ability of these homes to operate. Now the lawyers involved in the class action lawsuit saying that, well, no, this is a way for you to try and sidestep accountability, to avoid accountability. And the government so far has not given any indication that they are going to go ahead with something like that. They're aware of the requests, they're aware of the lobbying, but they aren't obviously moving ahead with it just yet. But I think that's important because so many people have had a loved one in long-term care. So many people have had a loved one who's been lost in long-term care. And it's an accountability mechanism to some extent. But it'll be quite interesting to see if any jurisdictions in the country go ahead with something like this, in the wake of so much tragedy in these places.
Now, Tyler, before I let you go, I want to talk to you a bit about the Edmonton Football Club. It sounds like they've put a patent on or a trademark on the Edmonton Elk as a potential name. As a former Eskimos, the Edmonton Elk. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's not bad. It's better than the Edmonton Empire or whatever the other option was.
Or the Evergreens,
I mean, I know
right?
there were a number, but yeah.
Yeah.
I can live with elk. I think so. We couldn't have had a third Rough Riders team, though. That would never have worked. So
That's right. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for your time.
always a pleasure, Hal.